Chapter 12, Home and Beyond. "What will we do now?" asked Chuma. "Well, we can always sail the boat by ourselves," said the doctor. "Even one man can sail it." "But you said we'd go to Lake Sherwa," said Wekatani. Livingston laughed wryly. "It would be foolish without any porters. They took the guns. What if we were attacked?" "But, doctor, you said you didn't want to use guns anyway," protested Chuma. "I don't, but it's never good to appear weak in the face of danger. Won't God protect us if we're doing His work?" asked Chuma sincerely. The doctor turned away from the boys and looked north across the lake, shimmering in its morning light. When he turned back, he sighed deeply. "I'm not sure I know what God's work for me is anymore," he confessed, pulling the ends of his mustache. "I was so sure, but everything I try seems to fail." He got up and set to building a fire. When it was crackling its comfort into the chill air, he turned to the boys again. "I guess there's still one thing I know to do." He looked into the fire and tossed a twig at it. "I should take you boys home. You've risked your lives for me, and even though I may not be able to save all of Africa from this evil slave trade, I can pay my debt to you. Let's go." The boys were elated. But first they rowed the boat up a small stream flowing into the lake until they came to a marsh, where they concealed the boat among tall reeds. "There," said Livingston. "Unless someone knows right where it is or comes on it accidentally, it'll never be found. I may not come back this way to explore Lake Nyassa again, but if I do, I'll have a boat." And then his craggy face broke into a grin. Then the doctor and the two boys waded out of the marsh and headed south. It was near sunset 3 days later when they came over a hill and saw in the distance the shining mirror of Lake Sherwa. This country was more open, rolling hills, groves of forests, and open grassland. The three travelers were hungry and bone-tired. Along the way they had avoided other people in all villages. They did not want any to announce their presence, but that also meant that they had no way of getting more food except for what they could gather along the trail. And the land to the north of Lake Sherwa had not been free from warfare either. From a distance they had seen burned villages, and on the trails they frequently came across a warning sign, a skull atop a spear that had been driven into the ground. But as they looked at their lake in the distance, Chuma asked, "Can we keep on going so we can get home tonight?" Livingston surveyed the lake glistening in a distance, and then looked at how close the sun was to the horizon. "The lake is still several miles away." "Where's your village?" "Around the lake, on the west shore," offered Wekatani. "It's a pretty big lake. It could take quite a while to get there. I think we ought to wait until morning." Though the boys were greatly disappointed, they did not complain. They knew the doctor was very tired and had already taken great risks in bringing them this far. But when they made camp, the boys could hardly sleep. "I wonder if our sheep all wandered back to the village," whispered Chuma as they stared up at the bright stars. "Our sheep? They're too dumb. If someone didn't go out and round them up, they'd wander right off the earth." "You think our families think we are dead?" "Probably," said Wekatani. "Won't they be surprised when we come marching in?" "I'm going to have my mother make a big feast for Dr. Livingston." Chuma could hear the man already snoring softly near them. "Maybe my father will assign some men to be new porters for him," said Wekatani. In their excitement, the boys left unspoken any fears they had about the Manganja boast that all the villages around Lake Sherwa had been burned out. After all, it was just a boast. The Manganja had been trying to frighten them. Finally, they dropped off to sleep. But they were up early in the morning, and, with the doctor in tow, they covered the distance to the lake shore while the air was still cool. "Look!" shouted Wekatani. "That's our village across the lake. See the white strip of beach? And the little trail of smoke rising in the air? My mother's probably baking bread for breakfast." Several times the doctor had to urge the boys to slow down as they traveled around the edge of the lake. After they had gone about 5 miles, Chuma pointed out that they were now on the trail that they often used when they took their sheep to pasture. "In another quarter hour," he said to the doctor. "Right down there. That's where the redcaps got us. They tied me up," said Wekatani, "and broke a Manganja spear and shot one of our sheep. and I came running through the shallows to help him," said Chuma. "But another red cap was waiting for me, and he had a gun." A few minutes later, when the boys came in sight of their village, they began to race each other for home. Chuma was 2 strides behind when Wikitani suddenly stopped short. Chuma ran ahead in glee, looking back over his shoulder as he shot past his friend. But Wikitani was staring strangely ahead. Chuma also slowed down as he looked down the hill toward the village. Something was wrong. There were no canoes on the beach. Some of the houses had been knocked down, some burned. Chuma pushed the panic away and forced himself to walk. There were no joyful sounds of children shouting and playing. No dogs came out to bark at them. But the village was not deserted. A few people could still be seen moving from hut to hut. Again he began to run. He tore past the old sheep pen. There were no sheep in it. Of course, someone else is out herding them, he reassured himself. He turned right after the first house. Its thatched roof was caving in. In the doorway of the next house sat a strange woman. Who's she? I know all my neighbors. I know everyone in the village, he thought. Maybe she's a visitor. His own house was next, but as Chuma rounded the corner of his neighbor's house, he faced a burned-out pile of rubble. Half of one mud wall was still standing, and a few roof beams lay haphazardly against it like a blackened log jam on a river after a spring flood. He turned to the right and left. The only building belonging to Chuma's family that still stood was their corn crib. He ran over to it and around to the door, thinking his family might be taking shelter within, but that whole side was knocked out. Not one single ear of corn remained. "Mother! Father!" Chuma yelled. "Mother, where is everyone?" He ran to the next house, just a hut, really, but it was completely empty. He ran on from house to house. All had been badly damaged. Many had been burned to the ground. Panic completely engulfed him. He ran up behind an old grandmother, finally someone he knew. He grabbed her and spun her around. "Where's my mother?" he demanded. But the old woman didn't say a word. She just stared at him as if he were a ghost. He ran to the other side of the village to Wikitani's house. As he approached, he saw with relief that it was standing and that people were home. Wikitani was standing outside talking to someone, standing in the dark doorway. "Where's my family?" he insisted as he skidded to a stop. Wikitani turned to him with horror on his face. "They're dead. Almost everyone is dead." His voice came out in a high-pitched whisper. "No, it can't be. Who are these people?" Chuma pushed past the woman standing in the doorway of Wikitani's house. He looked around. There were several others in the dark interior, but he recognized no one. "Who are these people?" he demanded as he came back out into the blinding sun. "They say they are my cousins," said Wikitani. "They're from another village over the hills." He pointed back toward the north. "But what has happened?" The boys looked at each other in silence. Finally, the woman standing in the doorway spoke up. "The Ajawa had many great victories, but then the battle turned and the Manganja overran this village. Many warriors from our village in the hills came down to help, but we were too late." Wikitani sat down in the dust and began to rock back and forth, moaning quietly. Chuma just stood there. He knew that war killed people, but he had refused to believe that his family might die, not even when the Manganja man had said that the villages around Lake Sherwa had been defeated. "But all are not dead," said the woman as she came out and put her hand on Wikitani's shoulder. "Your little brother is still alive." At first it seemed that Wikitani had not heard. Then he looked up slowly and said, "What?" "I said your little brother is alive." "Where?" "He's with your uncle down at the lake." Wikitani jumped up and ran toward the water. Chuma turned and followed along slowly, walking as though he were in a dream. Suddenly, Dr. Livingston was walking beside him. The white man put his arm around the boy's shoulder and pulled him close. At the lakefront, Chuma and the doctor stood at a distance while Wikitani and his little brother hugged each other and cried. They stood there in silence a very long time. Finally, the doctor said, "You know, Chuma, You could come with me. That night, the two boys went for a walk along the lake shore. They followed the path that they had taken with the sheep that fateful day and stopped again at the point where they had been ambushed. They sat on the sand, thinking about all that had happened in the last months. Chuma, when you get back to the mission, try to talk to Dauma again. Tell her that I'll never forget her kindness to us. Without her, we might have died, agreed Chuma. Soon a new moon rose. It was nothing more than a golden fingernail of light, but it laid down a shimmering path across the placid, black waters. The doctor saved our lives, too, added Wikitani. Yes, said Chuma. He's been like a father to us. You know, I think he knew what we might find here, and he didn't have to bring us back. But I'm glad he did. I had to know. Me too. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena howled its hideous laugh. In a few minutes, Wikitani continued, You once said that if our families were dead, you would become a Christian and stay with the doctor. Is that why you're going with him? Chuma thought before answering. No. I became a Christian when I still thought our families were safe, and I would still be a Christian even if the doctor hadn't offered for me to go with him. Yes, I think you would. And I believe in Jesus, too. Do you think he would baptize me before you go? Chuma grinned at his friend. Of course! Ask him, first thing in the morning. But I wish I could help the doctor, too, said Wikitani wistfully. He is doing a great work, even if he can't see the benefits. That's true, agreed Chuma. How else would we have heard about Jesus? Someone had to come tell us. A slight breeze turned the path of moonlight on the lake into a field of glittering diamonds. Again, Wikitani broke the silence. I just wish I could go with you. Me too. But you need to take care of your brother, and we don't want our village to die out. No, I guess not. After a moment, Wikitani turned to Chuma. You wouldn't desert the doctor like those porters did, would you? Promise me. Chuma grasped Wikitani's wrist as his friend's hand clasped his own wrist in a sign of friendship. As long as God gives me the strength and courage, I will remain with Dr. Livingston and help him in his work, Chuma vowed. You can count on that, my friend.